David, coming off the heels of that APEC Summit, which I think actually proved a lot of people wrong, because I think a lot of people thought, oh, nothing's going to come out of this. But just the fact that you had the two world leaders of the two biggest economies actually face-to-face talking, that in and of itself had to be an accomplishment.
Yeah, it certainly is better to talk than not to talk, right? Which is what we've been doing in the past. So we're all as investors, we're trying to figure out what this all means for us down the road. And to give us an answer to that question, we turn now to Deborah Lehr. She's Edelman Global Advisory CEO, as well as Vice Chairman and Executive Director at the Paulson Institute. Deborah, great to have you back with us. So what did get accomplished in this meeting between President Biden and President Xi last week?
Well, I think it met expectations, and expectations were fairly low. Out of the summit, they were able to reach agreement on military-to-military communications. Again, while that may sound like a small accomplishment, it's critically important in case of some kind of accident. They agreed to work together to fight against the import of fentanyl into the United States, which is a scourge that's crossing our country. But also what President Xi was trying to do on this visit was to reassure the U.S. business community and the global business community, quite honestly, that China is addressing the economic challenges that they have, that China is still open for business, and that they're still welcoming of foreign firms in China.
Yeah, that certainly was a priority for President Xi, because quite apart from the meeting with President Biden, he had that meeting with the CEOs, and he seemed to be trying to deliver a message, basically, we're open for business, come back and investment, which he needs to do given where foreign direct investment is gone. I guess my question is, how will investors know whether this is a real change in policy or rather just the message has changed?
Well, I think it's always like President Reagan said, trust but verify. One, a large part of it will be the actions that China takes to reassure the business community, including continuing to open markets. Today, regulatory risk is one of the biggest challenges. Foreign firms are never quite sure what new regulations are going to be coming out of the Chinese government, or in some cases, even the US government, and how they're going to have to react to it, or how, like in the case of China's national security law, it's going to be interpreted. And in many cases, it's really a question of confidence. Does the U.S. business community have confidence in the direction that China is going to take, that they're going to take the difficult steps to reinvigorate the Chinese economy? Can they reassure Chinese consumers to start to spend, which will also help with the economy? And as I was saying, will they continue to reassure the U.S. business community that they're willing to not only open the market, but continue to assure that it's a level playing field for them in China?
Well, that brings me to my question, Deborah, particularly when you look at actual investors, not just the businesses on the ground, but those foreign investors looking to invest in China who effectively have kind of been on strike for the last year or so. And I am curious as to how much of that is more tied to economic conditions, or is it more tied to the political and geopolitical conditions?
Well, it's an excellent question, and certainly it's a combination of both. The U.S.-China tensions create the atmosphere, particularly when you have Capitol Hill, who's looking very carefully at private equity and venture capital and the investments and what that money is going towards. Is it being used to support military innovativeness in China, and can that be used against us? The new outbound investment regulations are supposed to address that, but also that doesn't explain 6 quarters of outflows of capital, $160 billion, when China used to be just 2 years ago the largest destination for direct foreign investment. So it's certainly confidence in the Chinese economy itself, where it's going, and the ability of investors to continue to benefit from that.
Given China's size and, more importantly, its influence in the world, Deborah, there's been, of course, a lot of criticism that Xi Jinping hasn't taken a little bit more of a public stance on some of the geopolitical conflicts out there. That includes the war in Ukraine. But we are learning that he is hosting Arab leaders and Islamic leaders in an effort, I guess, to provide some sort of solution to what's going on with Israel and Hamas?
That's right. You know, China is actually the largest trading partner to 75% of the world, a position that the U.S. held just 20 years ago. And naturally, its foreign policy is going to follow those economic interests. The Middle East is increasingly one of its most important trading partners, and it is the largest trading partner to most of those countries. So we've seen an increase in China's willingness to step in to try and resolve some of the conflicts. Just recently, they helped broker a détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They have been vocal, quite honestly, in support of the Palestinians and Gaza. They had actually had planned to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to China in October. Clearly, that visit is indefinitely put on hold, but they have been trying to find a way to play a role to broker some kind of arrangement. And today they're hosting a 2-day meeting with Arab and Islamic leaders, as you said, to try and move towards some kind of peaceful solution.
Deborah, you referred to the need for President Xi to restore some confidence in the international community. Is his bigger challenge when it comes to confidence with the international investing community or back home to get his domestic economy going? Because part of the concern is that people are sitting on their savings rather than spending them because of the uncertainty about the regime.
Absolutely. I think that the two go very closely together. Confidence is a big issue in China. People have to feel confident that the healthcare system is going to support them. They have to feel confident that their children are going to get jobs, particularly when unofficial unemployment rates for the youth could run as high as 40%, it said. So these are all concerns that the Chinese people have about the economy, and which is why in many cases they're sitting on their money. Where are they going to put their investments when they can't invest in real estate? And that goes hand in hand with how the foreign community are looking at the opportunities there. At the same time, as you look at where to put your money and the investment opportunities, it's appealing when a lot of the Western democracies, for example, their interest rates are going up. Can you get a better return there than the somewhat sluggish growth that you're seeing today in China?